The splintered end of the broken broom handle felt like an extension of her own bones. Zara's knuckles were white, the only color in a grip that had long since lost all feeling. A thin crimson line snaked down her forearm from a shallow graze, the blood stark against her dark skin and the deep green of her nurse's scrubs. It was the only wound that showed. The others, the ones that had carved themselves into her soul over 25 years of a hard life, were invisible. They were also the source of the fire that now burned in her eyes, a defiant inferno against the 3 masked men who circled her. Behind her, a frail, 70-year-old woman in a beige dress trembled, her hand clutching the back of Zara's scrubs like a child seeking refuge from a storm. The woman, Sunhee Park, whispered prayers in Korean, her voice a fragile bird song in the sudden, violent silence of the cordoned-off street. The thugs had been so fast, a screech of tires, black masks, the glint of pistols. But they hadn't counted on her. They never did. They looked at Zara and saw a nurse, a civilian, an obstacle to be brushed aside. They didn't see the girl who had learned to fight in alleys where mercy was a foreign word. They didn't see the survivor who had sworn an oath in blood and tears that she would never again stand by while the strong preyed on the weak. One of the men, the leader, his eyes cold slits above his mask, gestured with his pistol. "Get out of the way. This isn't your business." Zara's breath was a ragged rasp in her throat. She shifted her weight, the worn soles of her sneakers grinding on the asphalt. The stick in her hand was her only shield, her only weapon, a piece of forgotten trash that had become a scepter of defiance.
She didn't speak.
Her answer was in the tightening of her jaw, the unyielding set of her shoulders. She would not move. She would not let go. She would break before she bent. They didn't know it yet, standing there on that sun-drenched pavement, but this single moment of impossible courage was a stone tossed into a placid, dark lake. The ripples would reshape a city's underworld. It would earn her a name spoken in whispers in places of power and fear. It would give her a home forged in violence and a family bound by honor. This was not the end of her story. This was the violent, bloody birth of who she was always meant to be. 12 hours earlier, the world had been a muted gray. Zara's apartment was little more than a box, for walls holding in the scent of antiseptic and solitude. The pre-dawn light struggled through a grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, lost souls. She sat at a small, wobbly table, methodically eating a bowl of plain oatmeal. Her movements were economical, drained of all wasted energy. It was a habit learned from years of chronic fatigue, the kind that settles deep in the bones and never truly leaves. Her dark green scrubs were already on, a second skin she wore more often than her own clothes. They were clean, pressed, but perpetually faded, a testament to countless long shifts and industrial washing machines. She ran a hand over her face, the skin of her palm rough against her hollow cheekbones. In the reflection of the dark window, she saw a ghost of herself. Eyes too old for a 25-year-old face, a lattice of faint, silvery scars tracing a line from her temple into her hairline on the left side, usually hidden by her hair. They were souvenirs from a life she tried to forget, a past that clung to her like a shadow. Her job was her entire existence. A long-term care facility where she moved with a quiet competence that her colleagues mistook for detachment. She cleaned wounds, administered medication, and held the hands of the dying. She was good at it because she understood pain. She knew its texture, its weight, its insidious way of seeping into everything. But she kept a professional wall between herself and the world, a fortress of silence. She didn't make friends. She didn't go out. She worked. She came home to her empty box. She ate her simple meal, and she fell into a sleep that was rarely restful, often punctuated by fractured images of shouting and broken glass. This was not living. It was a sustained act of survival, an endless, looping penance for a failure she could never forgive. The world outside her window was a cacophony of sirens and traffic, but inside, there was only the soft scrape of her spoon against the bowl. It was a fragile piece, the kind she had fought to build from the ashes of her old life, and she guarded it fiercely, unaware that the foundations were about to be shattered by a duty she could not refuse. Far across the city, in a penthouse that pierced the clouds, the world was not gray, but a stark, clean panorama of glass and steel. Jin-woo Park stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, his hands clasped behind his back. His suit was a masterpiece of dark, tailored silk, sharp enough to cut. His reflection was that of a predator at rest, impossibly still, with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He was the silent king of the city's hidden empire, a man whose name was a command, whose displeasure was a death sentence. His office was a monument to minimalist power, a single black desk, a series of screens displaying financial data and security feeds, and a priceless celadone vase holding a single, perfect white orchid. Into this sterile silence walked the only warmth it ever knew. Sun-hee Park, his mother, entered without a sound, carrying a small tray. She wore a simple but elegant beige dress, her silver hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. Her face, though lined with the 70 years she had lived, held a serene grace that defied the brutal world her son commanded. She placed a cup of steaming barley tea on his desk. "You work too hard, Jin-woo," she said, her voice soft but firm, the only voice in the world that could chide him without consequence. He turned, the icy mask of his expression melting into something softer, a fractional thaw that only she could inspire. "Mother," he took the cup, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. "There is much to do." She looked at the screens, her eyes passing over the cold data without comprehension or interest. Her world was one of gardens, poetry, and the quiet dignity of her home. She was the soul he fought to protect, the last piece of his own humanity. A discreet chime sounded. On one of the screens, the face of his top lieutenant, Kong, appeared. "Sir." A moment, Jin-woo nodded for his mother to wait and touched a control on his desk. "Report." Kang's face was grim. "Word on the street. Victor Orloff is getting ambitious. His people are asking questions. About your routines. Your assets." Jin-woo's eyes narrowed. Orloff was a Russian brute, a new player who mistook savagery for strength. "He is a dog barking at the moon, Kong. Let him." "Sir, my sources say he is targeting your personal interests. He feels you have shown weakness." Jin-woo's lip curled in a sneer so faint it was almost invisible. "Weakness? Then we will give him a lesson in strength. Double the watch on all shipments. Let him choke on his ambition." He cut the connection, his focus returning to his mother. The brief, cold intrusion of his world was over. He would handle Orloff. He would handle everything. The thought that the Russian dog might be foolish enough to target the one pure thing in his life, the woman standing before him, never even crossed his mind. It was an unthinkable, suicidal line to cross. In a damp, cavernous warehouse reeking of rust and diesel fuel, Victor Orloff laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound that echoed off the corrugated steel walls. He sat sprawled on a worn leather couch that looked grotesquely out of place, a bottle of expensive vodka in one hand. He was a bear of a man, with a thick neck and a face ruddy from drink and unrestrained appetites. His suit was flashy and ill-fitting, a cheap imitation of the power he so desperately craved. Around him, his thugs stood in a semicircle, their black clothes and grim expressions a stark contrast to their leader's boisterous cruelty. These were men who followed him not out of loyalty, but for the promise of easy money and the license for violence. "So, the great Jin-woo Park," Victor boomed, taking a long pull from the bottle. "He sits in his glass tower and thinks he is a god. He thinks his rules apply to everyone." He slammed the bottle down on a crate, making his men jump. "But every god has a temple, and every temple can be desecrated." He grinned, revealing a row of gold-capped teeth. "We have watched him. His trucks, his warehouses, all fortresses. He expects an attack on his business. He is a man of logic. But we," he tapped his temple, "we are men of imagination." One of his lieutenants, a wiry man with nervous eyes, shifted his weight. "Boss, what is the target?" Victor's grin widened into a predatory leer. "The target is not a thing. The target is a heart. His mother." The old woman, a murmur went through the group. Even for these hardened criminals, there were lines. Harming women, especially the elderly, was considered bad form, an invitation for a type of retribution that was biblical in its scope. The lieutenant swallowed hard.
Victor.
Park will not negotiate. He will burn the city to the ground to find her. Let him burn it. Victor roared, his face purpling with rage. He will be so busy burning. We will take everything else. He is sentimental. A Korean flaw. They value family honor. We will use his honor to strangle him. We grab the old woman. We make one call. Not for ransom. We tell him to cede the Port Authority to us. By the time his men find her, we will be entrenched. He will have lost his mother and his empire in one move. It is brilliant. He saw the doubt in their faces and his tone hardened. It will be clean. She goes for a walk every afternoon. Near the old market. A little taste of her old life. She dismisses her guards for 1 block. 1 block. My sources are perfect. We move in, we grab her, we are gone in 30 seconds. No one will even see us. A ghost. Who would dare to stop us? He looked around at his men, his arrogance absolute. He truly believed it. In his world of brute force, the idea of a bystander, of a simple nurse with a core of steel, was a fantasy. The sun was high and warm, a welcome change from the sterile, refrigerated air of the care facility. Zara walked with her head down, the rhythmic slap of her sneakers on the pavement a familiar cadence. Her shift had ended early, a rare gift she didn't know what to do with. The extra hours of freedom felt less like a blessing and more like a void to be filled. She clutched the strap of her worn messenger bag, its contents Spartan. A half-eaten sandwich, her keys, a dog-eared paperback she hadn't opened in weeks. The street was alive with the gentle hum of a peaceful afternoon. Vendors called out from their stalls at the edge of the market. The air smelled of grilled meat and fresh flowers, a vibrant mix that felt alien to her muted existence. She was an observer, a shadow passing through a world of color and life. A few blocks away, Sunhee Park smiled as she examined a stall of vibrant, hand-dyed silks. Her 2 bodyguards, discreet and well-dressed, stood a respectful distance away. They were good men, loyal to her son, but their constant presence was suffocating. For a few moments each day, she liked to pretend she was just another woman enjoying the market. Wait here, she told them in Korean, her tone gentle but firm. I just want to walk to the end of the street. To see Mrs. Kim's peonies. I will be 2 minutes, the lead guard hesitated. Mrs. Park, it is not advisable, nonsense. She waved a dismissive hand. This is a peaceful place. I have been walking this street since before you were born. 2 minutes, reluctantly, they acquiesced, watching as she turned the corner onto the quieter side street. It was a small rebellion, a brief taste of the normal life she missed. Her beige dress caught the gentle breeze, and for a moment, she was not the mother of a crime lord, but just Sunhee, on her way to admire some flowers. Zara, walking from the opposite direction, saw the elderly woman. She noticed her simple elegance, the peaceful expression on her face. There was something about her that reminded Zara of a patient she had once cared for, a woman who had spoken of gardens and poetry until her last breath. It was a fleeting thought, a momentary connection in a life of disconnection. The street was quiet. A delivery van was parked haphazardly, its side door slightly ajar. The sun cast long shadows. The world held its breath, poised on the precipice of a collision that neither woman could have ever imagined. 2 lives, one forged in poverty and trauma, the other in privilege and protection, were about to intersect in an explosion of violence. The screech of tires was the first sound to break the afternoon's peace. It was a violent, tearing noise that made Zara flinch, her head snapping up. A black van, the one parked carelessly, had lurched forward, blocking the narrow street. The side door slid open with a deafening rattle, and 3 men in black masks and dark clothing spilled out onto the pavement. They moved with a predatory swiftness, their target immediately clear. They were converging on the old woman in the beige dress. People on the sidewalk gasped. A fruit vendor dropped a crate of oranges, the bright spheres scattering across the asphalt like panicked animals. But no one moved to help. They froze or they fled, a collective instinct for self-preservation taking over. The men reached Sunhee. One grabbed her arm. She cried out, a sound of surprise and fear that lanced through the air and struck Zara like a physical blow. The sound.
The grab.
The look of sheer terror in the old woman's eyes. It was a perfect, horrifying echo. Suddenly, Zara was no longer on a sunlit street. She was 15 again, in a cramped, dark apartment that smelled of stale beer and fear. Her stepfather, a mountain of rage, had her younger brother cornered. The same look of terror was on her brother's face. She had stood frozen, just like the people on the street now, paralyzed by a fear so profound it turned her bones to water. He had grabbed her brother, and she had done nothing. She had just watched. The sound of the impact, the cry that followed, the sight of her brother falling, it was a memory branded onto the inside of her eyelids. She had run then. She had run and never stopped, leaving him behind. He had survived, but something between them had been irrevocably broken. Her failure, her cowardice. It was the defining moment of her life, the sin for which she was still atoning. No, Zara whispered, the word a puff of air. The flashback shattered, and the present crashed back in with visceral clarity. The masked man was dragging Sunhee toward the van. The old woman's eyes met Zara's for a split second, a silent, desperate plea. And in that instant, the dam of fear and apathy that had protected Zara for a decade burst. The fire she kept banked deep inside roared to life. This time, she would not run. This time, she would not be a bystander. This time, she would not fail. Her body moved before her mind had fully processed the decision. It was pure instinct, a primal response to a familiar horror. Her eyes darted around, searching, and found it leaning against a closed storefront, a heavy-duty janitor's broom. She lunged for it. Her hands closed around the thick wooden handle. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she slammed the brush end against the brick wall. The plastic had shattered, and the handle cracked. She twisted it, and with a sound like a bone snapping, the head came off, leaving her with a 5-foot length of solid wood, the end a jagged, splintered point. It was crude, but it was heavy, and it felt right in her hands. The thugs were almost to the van, manhandling Sunhee, who was struggling weakly. Leave her alone. Zara's voice was not the quiet murmur of a nurse. It was a raw, guttural roar that made the men pause and turn. They saw her, a lone woman in green scrubs, holding a broken stick. The leader laughed, a muffled, contemptuous sound from behind his mask. Get lost before you get hurt, Zara didn't reply. She charged. She wasn't a trained fighter. She didn't know stances or forms. She was a survivor, and she moved with the desperate, brutal efficiency of a cornered animal. She didn't aim for the body. She aimed for the hands, the joints, the things that could grab and hold. She swung the staff in a wide, horizontal arc. The first man, caught by surprise, raised his arm to block. The heavy wood connected with his wrist with a sickening crunch. He screamed and staggered back, his pistol clattering to the ground. The second man lunged, and Zara jabbed forward, using the splintered point like a spear, driving it into his thigh. He howled and collapsed, clutching his leg. Now it was just her and the leader, who still had a firm grip on Sunhee. He was furious, his arrogance replaced by a cold rage. He shoved Sunhee toward Zara, using her as a shield, and raised his pistol. I'll kill you both, he snarled. Zara sidestepped, keeping herself between him and his target. Let her go, suddenly. A deafening bang echoed through the street. A searing heat tore across Zara's left arm. She looked down and saw the crimson line bloom on her sleeve. The pain was sharp, electric, but it only seemed to sharpen her focus, burning away the last vestiges of fear. She met the leader's eyes, her own gaze filled with a terrifying, absolute certainty. She would die here before she let him take this woman. The standoff was absolute, a moment stretched taut with lethal promise. The stalemate held for a lifetime contained in 10 seconds. Zara, bleeding and breathing in ragged gasps, did not waver. The splintered point of her staff was aimed directly at the leader's throat. His own pistol was trained on her chest. Behind her, Sun He sobbed quietly. The thug was recalculating. This was supposed to be easy. A simple snatch and grab. He had planned for a warrior in nurse's scrubs. He was about to make a decision, to shoot and run or to try and grab the old woman again, when a new sound cut through the tension. It started as a low rumble and grew rapidly into the thunder of powerful engines. At the end of the street, a black Mercedes SUV, impossibly sleek and menacing, skidded to a halt, followed by two more identical vehicles. They formed a tactical blockade, sealing the area. Doors flew open in perfect synchrony, and 6 men in sharp, dark suits emerged. They moved with the cold, fluid precision of a wolf pack, their hands already holding suppressed firearms pointed with unnerving calm. The entire dynamic of the street shifted in an instant. The air grew heavy, charged with a new, far more dangerous authority. The thug's bravado evaporated, replaced by raw, primal fear. He recognized the emblem on the cars. He knew who these men were. His plan had not just failed, it had become a suicide note. The rear door of the lead SUV opened. Jinwoo Park stepped out. He did not run. He moved with a deliberate, terrifying calm, his eyes sweeping the scene. They took in the collapsed thug, the one clutching a broken wrist, and the trembling leader. They passed over them as if they were insignificant. His gaze locked first onto his mother, a flicker of raw emotion crossing his icy features. Then, his eyes moved to the woman standing in front of her. He saw the green scrubs, the blood on her arm, the defiance in her posture, and the splintered broom handle held like a sacred weapon. He understood everything in that single, chilling glance. Kong, his lieutenant, gave a short, sharp nod to his men. It was over. There were no negotiations, no shouts. Just a series of swift, brutal movements. The captured thugs were disarmed and subdued with a chilling efficiency that spoke of countless such encounters. The leader, realizing all was lost, made a fatal mistake. He shoved Sunhee aside and tried to raise his pistol toward Jinwoo. He never completed the motion. A single, soft PHHD sound and a small, dark hole appeared in the center of his forehead. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. The sudden, brutal violence was followed by an even more unnerving silence. The bodies of the neutralized thugs were swiftly and discreetly removed, bundled into one of the black vans by Jinwoo's men with the detached efficiency of sanitation workers clearing trash. The street, which moments before had been a battlefield, was being methodically wiped clean of the entire incident. Sunhee rushed to Zara, her hands fluttering over the bloody sleeve. "Oh, my dear girl, you are hurt. You are so brave," she said, her Korean words a torrent of gratitude and concern. She took Zara's uninjured hand, her touch surprisingly firm, refusing to let go. An ambulance, summoned with the same quiet authority as the SUVs, pulled up. Paramedics, their faces carefully neutral, began to tend to Zara's arm, cleaning and bandaging the wound. Through it all, Zara felt a strange sense of detachment, the adrenaline ebbing away to leave a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Then he was there. Jinwoo Park stopped a few feet away, his presence a palpable force field. He was taller than she'd expected, his stillness more intimidating than any overt threat. His eyes, cold as chips of obsidian, raked over her, from her worn sneakers to the fresh white bandage on her arm, to the defiant set of her jaw. He was not looking at a hero. He was assessing an asset, a weapon, an anomaly. He finally spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone that held no warmth, only weight. "They told me what you did. It was not a thank you. It was a statement of fact." Zara simply nodded, too tired to speak, her throat dry. She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. She had faced down a gun for his mother. She would not flinch from a stare. He took a step closer. The scent of expensive cologne and cold power washed over her. "My mother's life is without price," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. This creates a debt. One that I cannot repay with money. He paused, his eyes boring into hers, seeing past the scrubs and the fatigue, into the hollow spaces carved out by her past. He saw the ghost of the fighter she was. You have nothing, he stated, not cruelly but as an observation. You live in a box. You fight like you have nothing to lose, because you believe you have already lost everything. You are wrong. He extended a hand, not to her, but as a gesture to the world. He commanded, I am offering you something more than a reward. I am offering you a purpose. My mother requires a guardian, not a bodyguard who stands at a distance, but someone who stands beside her. Someone with the will to do what is necessary. He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes and clarified, his words as sharp as glass. I am offering you a place, a home, a war to fight, your pain. I can give it a target. Weeks later, the scent of antiseptic was gone, replaced by the subtle fragrance of sandalwood and old money. Zara stood on a wide balcony overlooking a meticulously manicured garden, the city sprawling below like a conquered territory. She was no longer in faded green scrubs. She wore simple, practical black trousers and a dark gray silk shirt, clothes that were both elegant and allowed for unrestricted movement. In her hands, she held not a splintered broom handle, but a perfectly balanced bow staff made of polished ironwood. It was a gift from Jin Woo, delivered without comment, but the message was clear. She was no longer just a survivor, she was being forged into a weapon. Her days now had a new rhythm. Mornings were spent in the estate's private gymnasium with a quiet, wiry old man who was a master of a dozen martial arts. He was teaching her discipline, form, how to channel her raw, desperate ferocity into a deadly, controlled art. Afternoons were spent with Sunhee. They would walk in the gardens, read poetry, or simply sit in comfortable silence. The old woman had adopted Zara, seeing in her not a guard, but the strong, resilient daughter she'd never had. Zara found herself slowly, cautiously, letting her walls down. The hollow space inside her was beginning to fill with something she hadn't felt since childhood, a sense of belonging. She had a place. She had a purpose. Jin Woo remained a distant, powerful presence. She would see him in the evenings, a dark specter moving through the vast house. He rarely spoke to her directly, but she would often feel his eyes on her while she trained, a cold, calculating gaze of appraisal. It was not friendship, but it was a form of respect she had never known. One evening, Kong, the lieutenant, approached her as she finished her training. He placed a tablet on a nearby table. It showed a news report about a gangland execution. The face of Victor Orloff, bloated and surprised even in death, flashed on the screen. His empire had crumbled in a single, bloody night. The debt is paid, Kong said quietly before walking away. Zara looked from the screen to the city lights. The world was still a brutal, dangerous place. But for the first time in her life, she was no longer its victim. She had found her war, and she had found her family. The scars of her past were still there, but they no longer defined her. They were a map that had led her here. They were the source of her strength. She gripped the ironwood staff, the weight of it solid and real in her hands, and felt a profound, unshakable peace. She was home. And so, a forgotten soul found her purpose in the heart of the storm. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something far more real, more powerful. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the deepest wounds give birth to the greatest strength. If her story of courage has moved you, show your support. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of unlikely heroes, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that even one person can make a world of difference.